G'day everyone, welcome to Brushes with Beck, where you can see a new art video every week. In today's video I'm going to be painting a Crimson Rosella, which is a bird native to my area. Now the paper that I am using today is the Strathmore 400 series mixed media toned blue paper. It's a beautiful paper. I think it's I can't remember the dimensions, about 5 by 8 inches, it's the smaller one. The paint that I am using today on this paper is a traditional gouache, which means a water-based gouache. It is the Windsor Newton brand, and I'm using not very many colours. I have a cool blue, warm blue, a cool red, warm red, basic colours, and I'm just mixing up what I need as I go. So to start with, I've just done a base layer of yellow on the front of the bird because I wanted to try and get some of that brighter yellow in to begin with, so I didn't lose that too much later on, along with some brightness of red on the head, just as a bit of a base that I can work on later, layer up over and create depth with. Now, my apologies in advance. This is the first time I have filmed painting, and also the first time I have filmed from this angle. I tried a new setup for this video, and I forgot to actually test whether my hand was going to be in the way or not, and as it turns out, it was kind of in the way, quite a lot. So there are times when, yes, I block the paintbrush with my big fat thumb, and other times you can actually see what I'm painting. So that's definitely something I will be working on in the future. So after putting down that base layer, I am working on developing a bit of depth to those layers, adding some slightly muted tones of other colours, a little bit of green into the yellow actually, just for some shadows, and some softer reds, blending some reds in with the yellow to get the change between colours in the feathers. Now on my palette at the top where you can't see, I have a white, a yellow and a brown. I think that's all that was up there. My apologies that you can't see me mixing the colours at the top of the palette there. It didn't quite fit. I'm just working through and building up that colour and building up that colour. One of the things when using gouache that I've found tricky is to get the consistency right, because getting the consistency right makes it much easier to layer over previous layers. So you sort of want a loose, creamy texture rather than a watery texture or a really thick texture. Although you can use it in those consistencies as well. For layering, the creamy texture is just a lot easier. So I'm just adding in some colour on the beak there, before mixing up some blue to add in some of the feathers around the face. Now I have actually tried a new editing program this week, and it's taken a little bit of learning, and I still don't 100% understand it, but it has worked so much more efficiently and much more nicely for these time-lapse videos. If you watched my video of my parrot drawing with colour pencil, you will have noticed that the video was a little bit glitchy, the sped up version, it was a little bit blurred together, the quality wasn't great. And I was really frustrated because I spent so long editing that, but I'm using a different program and it just works and it's beautiful. So what you notice here, I think it happened before, is I've accidentally painted outside where I want to paint, but gouache is actually quite easy to pick up colour if you want to pick up colour. I've just got a bit of clean water on the brush, scrubbed that piece of the paper, and then picked it up with the paper towel, and it actually removes the colour quite well, which is a relief, because a couple of times while I was painting my hand just twitched and my brush went completely out of where I wanted it to go. So if I was using an acrylic paint or an oil paint, I wouldn't really be able to do that. So once again, I'm just going in those darker areas on the yellow feathers, and you'll see throughout the whole painting I basically go back and refine this again and again and again Because looking at my reference, you know, you think you've got the base layer down, but as I work through the painting, I find it's easier to tell that my darks aren't dark enough and that my values need adjusting. So I go back and rework areas that I've already worked. And I feel like it also just helps it to feel a bit more cohesive as well, if I work through different areas and then come back to them repeatedly. Now just some more darker reds. Really trying to work in some texture on the feathers there. Now that brush that you can see me using at the moment, I think is a filbert. Is a filbert brush. I'm also using some different size of just fine pointed brushes just to get in some more of the detail. But I like the filbert because you can get some blockier, more textured areas, and then you can also turn it on the side and get some detailed work as well without having to change brushes, which is always convenient. So now I'm adding in some darker blues on the face there. So Rosellas have these cheek patches. In some species they're blue and in other species they are white. So Crimson Rosellas are a blue-cheeked Rosella, and it's a really vivid sort of blue. As you can see, yeah, my hand just twitched and I scraped the blue down into the red area. But because the red was fortunately already dry, I was able to pick up the blue reasonably easily without scrubbing any of the red off, which was really good. If you're working colour over a layer that isn't quite dry yet with gouache, you will often pull up some of the colour from the previous layer, and that can be all bad if you really don't want that. It can be good for blending and spreading colours together, but it can also be really, really frustrating if you don't want it to happen. So I'm really going in with some darks. The back of the wings isn't in shadow, that's just the colour pattern of the bird, and I'm adding some darker shadows under segments of the tail there, between the separated feathers. It also helps to sort of work in a different area to let another area dry, and then you can come back to that area, work it again while the other area is drying. So back and forth and back and forth. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you will have already seen the completed painting. So if you are interested in seeing my drawings and paintings before they make it onto YouTube, follow me on Instagram, because I often post them on there straight away, and sometimes the videos don't come out for 1, 2 or 3 weeks later because I need time to edit it, I need time to schedule it onto YouTube and just make sure I can fit it in. But if you're follow me on Instagram, I usually put them up there straight away. You can also find me on Facebook under the same name, but I am less active on Facebook, though I am trying to improve that. So I'm just adding some more definition to the head and the reds, adding some different tones to get a lot of depth of colour there so it doesn't look too flat. One of the challenges with gouache is that the paint dries a slightly different colour to what it goes on. So a lot of colours will dry darker than what they are when they're wet, and then some colours will even dry lighter than what they are when they're wet. So it makes it really difficult to colour match if you run out of a colour that you've mixed, and yeah, it's really difficult to match tones, and you know, you think you might have mixed up a darker colour, and then when it dries it turns out it wasn't darker at all because it dried lighter to the same tone you already had on the paper. So it's quite a challenging medium, but I'm really enjoying learning it because I also find it very versatile. Now I'm just putting in some of the blue for the tail feathers there. They've got beautiful blue tails. Trying to get some of the variations of colour and the shadows there. Once again, I apologise for my hand being in front of the end of my paintbrush so often. I was aware of it while I was filming, but just from the angle I was painting from, I thought my hand was out of the way. Clearly it wasn't. That's something I really need to work on. I may have to practice adjusting my grip on the paintbrush, because I do hold paintbrushes and pencils a little bit weird. Not the proper way, but it's just the way I did it as a kid, and so I've always done it that way. It's normal for me. Adding some highlights onto those tail feathers around the rims, getting them to really pop out a bit, and really working that colour in there. Now, I don't think I've actually said it yet, so I'm going to ask you to please comment on this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to me. Also hit that notification bell button if you do subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Every little bit of support helps my channel and helps motivate me to make more videos, I suppose. As you can see, I'm well, you can't really see because my hand's in the way again, sorry. Reworking in some areas of the darks under the tail there before moving on to the other tail feathers. Now, as you can see, I have actually remixed a blue tone for those tail feathers on the other side, so they do turn out slightly different colour to the original set of tail feathers that I did. But it doesn't really matter, and it's not hugely obvious because they're actually facing a slightly different angle. The light hits them in a different way anyway, and it's not, you know, it doesn't look abnormal for them to be a slightly different shade of the blue. I mean, there's so much variation in colours on feathers anyway that who would know? You wouldn't have known probably if I hadn't mentioned it. Now, I didn't want to lose my place on where my feathers were on this other side of the tail, which is why I've done every alternate feather and added in some shadows and some highlights at the base and the tip of those before adding in the feathers in between, so that I didn't lose my place, because the feathers on the opposite side had clear guides because they were overlapping more, overlapping less, so they stick out a bit so you can see where each feather ends. But the ones on this side, they were all overlapping in a row, so I had to keep track of where I was. Once again, reworking the wing, adding in some more highlights, and then adding highlights onto the tail. Now, if you happen to Google photos of Crimson Rosellas, you'll find a lot of them don't actually look like this. Most of them are just this beautiful, deep, vivid red with the blue cheek patches, the wings and the tail. But there is a lot of regional variation with different subspecies, and where I'm based, the subspecies has this mixed yellowy red orange wash up the front of the chest and on the belly, leading up to a red head. And there's quite a bit of variation in their range as to how much red they have on them. But they are a very beautiful bird. I'm actually really pleased with this image because I turned what's actually a very bad quality reference photo into a really nice image. But there's no reason you can't turn a bad reference photo into a good painting or a drawing. I didn't need a lot of specific detail. I needed colours and tones and accurate shapes and, you know, a few details of placement of tail feathers and, you know, seeing where the eyes and everything is. But this isn't a hyper-realistic painting, it's a realistic but more of an impression. You get the suggestions of detail and the suggestions of feathering and texture. So I'm just refining the beak shape and the detail around the beak and the eyes. Just because, like I just said, the reference photo was poor quality. So the detail in the eyes really isn't good, so I've kind of had to really work hard at making sure they look right because I can't exactly see what they look like in the photo. As you can see, that red I'm adding on there, as I'm laying it on, it's drying quite quickly because it's not that wet. And it's not actually that different to the original red once it starts to dry. So it sort of just adds a subtle texture, not like a really bold impact. So now I'm just working in the toes and details on there. This is something I probably should have done last because, as you'll see, I paint the toes, I texture them, I detail them, and then when I paint the branch I have to re-go over the toes because I've gone over the toes while painting the branch, but that's okay. That was just me wanting to finish the bird before moving on to the branch and then realising, oh wait, that's not how things work, you know. I mean, it doesn't matter, I was just able to paint over it anyway, but it was sort of, you know, a waste of time. It's like, why did I bother? So you can see me trying to add some darks under the tail there, and I'm kind of struggling, they kind of pull up as I'm trying to blend them in, and that's just one of the things I still don't quite 100% understand with gouache, but I'm still trying to get used to, is, you know, pulling up colour versus blending colour. And I mean, it's a really fun medium, but there's still some things where I go, why is that happening? I don't know, and I don't know how to make it not happen. So often it's just I have to let the paint dry a bit more, I think, and then come back to it. And here I go, finally working in the branch. As you can see, I've got quite a, it's not a runny paint, but it's a creamy sort of paint, and then you can see as it's drying a very different colour to what it's gone on. And that's very normal for gouache, and it's something you just have to get used to. I'm still not used to it, but I'm getting there. And then using my reference photo, I'm just adding in some lights and some darks and some sort of, you know, rough textures and impressions of, you know, the shadows and highlights on the branch. Waiting for that to dry and just adding in some, I think I'm adding in yellow there. I wanted to get some of the yellow feathers overlapping the blue that I'd done on the wing. So I just put a few little hints of yellow over the top of the blue just to give that a better feel. And then as you can see, I'm just blending the branch out a little bit. I don't want that quite so crisp, and I've made a mess again. So I'm pulling up the colour that I've gone outside of where I wanted it to be. Followed by adding more darks onto the branch. You know, just layering, getting extra elements of detail. Trying to sort of make it random while also looking at my reference photo, because you don't want to completely make it up as you go along if you don't really know what you're doing, because then it's not going to look real. So I'm looking at my reference, but I'm not following it too closely. Now what I'm doing here is actually adding a highlight underneath the branch, because a lot of the time if you're photographing birds or anything really, you'll get the light obviously from the sun or from the sky, but then you'll also get reflected light from the ground. So if the soil's like a sandy colour, it's going to reflect that yellowy brown back up underneath the branch there. And then I'm adding a pale blue highlights on top of the branch as the blue from the sky, that light coming down. softening it up once again. I don't want it to take away too much focus from the parrot either, because the parrot really needs to be the main focus. And then I'm refining those feet that I told you about because I went over them when I did the branch. Refining the detail, popping the highlights out and the shadows. And just adding a few more last details once again into that branch. Just a few little fiddly bits, I suppose. Just adding hints of sharp areas and scratches in the bark. And there you have it. I love pulling off the tape. I don't know about anybody else. It's much more satisfying when you have a complete image with the background that goes to the edges of the paper, but it's still a nice feeling. So thank you everybody so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you skipped to the end and you're not sure what you missed, I was using Strathmore toned blue mixed media paper with Windsor Newton traditional gouache paint there. Please comment, like and subscribe to my channel, comment on the video, give it a thumbs up, all of those things. Follow me over on Instagram. As I said, I upload there first. Everything goes on there sometimes weeks before it ends up on YouTube. So if you want to see something as soon as I finish it, follow me on there. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week for another video. Bye!